I told my son Brandon over dinner that I decided to leave my entire estate to the Asheville Community Fund. Not a single question about my health, my life, or even how I'd been feeling after Eleanor passed. No, he asked one question, cold calculated, and entirely about the money. You know that look, that half smile, the glint in his eyes that says, I already know how to get what I want. And in that moment right there on Maple Street, I realized something painfully clear. My son had stopped seeing me as his father. Stay with me here. This isn't about bitterness. It's about truth observation and the quiet ways people reveal themselves when money comes into play. By the way, where are you watching this from? What time is it there? Drop a comment below. I'd love to know. And hey, if you want more real raw family stories, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I've lived on Maple Street in Asheville, North Carolina for 32 years. Same white clapboard house. Same crooked mailbox Eleanor kept asking me to replace before she passed. Same porch swing that squeaks every time somebody sits down too hard on the left side. You'd think after 3 decades I would have fixed that squeak. I didn't. Some things become part of the soundtrack of your life. My name's Quinton Butler. I'm 68 years old, widowed, semi-retired, and according to my son Brandon, stubborn in ways that aren't practical anymore. That's a direct quote, by the way. Thanksgiving 2023. Right after he explained to me why owning physical photo albums was an inefficient use of storage space. You ever hear somebody say something so ridiculous you don't even argue back? You just butter your dinner roll and let them embarrass themselves. That's parenting after 40. Now, from the outside, my life looked simple enough. I drove a 2008 Ford Ranger with faded silver paint and exactly 214,000 miles on it. The air conditioning only worked if I slapped the dashboard twice near the radio. I wore old flannel shirts from Tractor Supply, drank black coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and spent most mornings at Bell's Corner Diner on Marymount Avenue. That diner mattered more than people realized. Bell's Corner wasn't one of those polished Asheville tourist spots with Edison bulbs and $18 avocado toast. No, it had cracked vinyl booths, uneven salt shakers, and a handwritten sign near the register that said, "No crypto talk before 8 a.m." That sign existed because of one specific incident involving a chiropractor named Dennis and 3 exhausted truck drivers. Stay with me here. The owner, Martha Bell, had been my best friend since high school. 66 years old, short gray curls, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, and the terrifying ability to detect emotional dishonesty before the average person finished a sentence. Martha could smell tension like a bloodhound. "You look tired," she told me one Tuesday morning while refilling my coffee. "I'm 68, I said. "That's just my face now." She snorted. "No, this is different. This is family tired. That woman missed nothing." I looked out the diner window toward the rain sliding down Marymount Avenue and tried to shrug it off. "Brandon's been visiting more lately," I said. Martha stopped mid-pour. "That's so." "Yep. And how long does he stay?" There it was. See, duration matters. People who visit because they love you stay longer than 12 minutes. Brandon had started stopping by every Thursday around 4:30 in the afternoon, always dressed sharp, tailored navy jackets, brown Italian loafers, that expensive cedar cologne that entered the room 30 seconds before he did. But lately the visits had become strangely efficient, like business meetings pretending to be family time. He'd stand in my kitchen holding sparkling water instead of coffee because apparently regular water wasn't ambitious enough anymore, and ask questions that sounded casual if you weren't paying attention. How much are property taxes running these days? You ever think about downsizing? Did Dad leave Mom's retirement accounts organized? Little things, tiny things. But I spent 27 years working forensic probate accounting cases across North Carolina and Tennessee. I investigated inheritance fraud, forged signatures, manipulated trusts, disappearing estate funds, all the ugly little ways grief and greed crawl into the same room together. And once you spend that many years watching people circle money, you start recognizing patterns, even in your own son, especially in your own son. I need you to understand something before you judge Brandon too harshly. He wasn't a monster. That's what made this hurt. If he'd been cruel his whole life, this would have been easier, cleaner, simpler. But Brandon used to be a good kid. He was the kind of little boy who carried injured birds home in shoeboxes, the kind who cried when Old Yeller died even though he'd already seen the movie twice. Eleanor used to joke that our son had too much heart for this world. Then life happened. Charlotte happened. Real estate happened. Image happened. You spend enough years around people measuring success by zip code and wristwatch brands, eventually your soul starts speaking in monthly payments. Brandon became very good at looking successful. The problem is looking successful is expensive. One Thursday evening in early October, Brandon came by around sunset. Asheville had that orange-blue mountain light rolling through the windows, and the air smelled like rain and chimney smoke. He walked in carrying pastries from French Broad Chocolate Lounge. Now listen carefully. That mattered, because Brandon never brought pastries unless he wanted something. That boy could arrive empty-handed to Christmas dinner, but suddenly show up with $12 croissants the minute paperwork entered the conversation. "You know that pattern too, don't you, Dad?" he said, setting the box on the counter. "Thought you might like these." "Are they healthy enough for a 68-year-old man?" I asked. He laughed automatically. Too automatically. That's another thing people don't realize about dishonesty. Forced laughter arrives too quickly. I made coffee while he wandered through the kitchen, pretending not to inspect things. His eyes paused on the file cabinet near the hallway. Gray metal. 4 drawers. Locked. Eleanor used to call it my crime cave. That cabinet held 30 years of financial records. Old wills, insurance documents, tax filings, property deeds, and investigative notes from cases I never fully emotionally left behind. Brandon pointed toward it casually. "You still keep everything in there?" "Mostly. You should digitize this stuff. Makes burglars work harder." Another automatic laugh. Then silence. Short silence. Tight silence. The kind where somebody is deciding how directly they can ask what they really want to know. Finally, he leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. "So, have you updated your estate plan since Mom passed?" There it was. Not, "How are you doing alone?" Not, "Do you still miss her?" Not, "You okay? Sleeping in that big house by yourself?" Straight to estate planning. I stirred my coffee slowly. "You worried about me dying suddenly, Brandon?" He blinked fast. "What?" "No. No. Dad, come on. You asked. I'm just trying to make sure things don't become complicated later." Complicated later. Huh, funny phrase. Because when people say later, what they often mean is soon enough for me to already be preparing. I smiled slightly and changed the subject. Asked about Claire, asked about work, asked about Charlotte traffic. He relaxed immediately. Too immediately. And that bothered me more than the question itself. After he left, I stood on the porch for a long time watching his black BMW X5 disappear down Maple Street. The taillights vanished around the corner near the old oak tree Eleanor used to decorate every Christmas with white lights. And for the first time in my life, I had the strange sinking feeling that my son was no longer visiting me because he missed me. He was visiting because he was measuring the distance between my life and my belongings. The trouble started when Brandon began visiting more often and staying less. The strange thing about suspicion is that once it settles into your chest, it changes the temperature of every conversation afterward. You start hearing pauses differently. You notice eye contact. You remember exact wording. And unfortunately for Brandon, I made a living for nearly 3 decades noticing things people wished I wouldn't. About 2 weeks after the pastry visit, Brandon stopped by again on a Thursday afternoon. Exactly 4:37 p.m. That mattered too. People with honest intentions arrive whenever they arrive. People with agendas arrive on schedules. I was out back cleaning leaves from the gutters when I heard his BMW pull into the driveway. Same polished black SUV, same expensive tires that probably cost more than my first apartment rent back in 1979. Brandon stepped out wearing a charcoal quarter-zip sweater, dark jeans, and one of those watches designed to inform strangers you've recently started making 6 figures. He looked successful. Tired too, but mostly successful. "Jesus, Dad," he called out, looking up at me on the ladder. "You're still doing that yourself?" "Well, the roof hasn't volunteered." He smiled, but distractedly. "You could hire somebody. I could also pay $28 for a hamburger downtown, but apparently I still believe in standards." That got a real laugh out of him. For a second, just 1 second, I saw my old son again. Then his phone buzzed. Everything changed immediately. He checked the screen. Jaw tightened. Quick reply typed with both thumbs. Business mode. You know that look. The modern American stress response. Tiny rectangle in your hand controlling your blood pressure. I climbed down the ladder slowly while Brandon wandered into the backyard, pretending to admire Eleanor's old hydrangeas. Claire used to love those flowers, too. Now, Claire Butler deserves fairness in this story. She wasn't greedy in the same way Brandon was. Nervous. Yes. Materialistic sometimes. But Claire always struck me as somebody who got swept into Brandon's momentum instead of creating it herself. That matters later. Inside the kitchen, I poured sweet tea into 2 glasses while Brandon paced near the counter island. He wasn't relaxed. He was building towards something. Finally, he cleared his throat. So, random question. No good sentence in American family history has ever started with random question. I leaned against the sink. Go ahead. You ever think about selling this place? There it was again. The house. Always the house. Now let me paint this clearly for you. The property on Maple Street wasn't flashy. The kitchen cabinets were older than most TikTok influencers. The upstairs bathroom tiles still had that pale yellow color people apparently loved in 1984 for reasons science cannot explain. But Asheville changed. What used to be a quiet mountain town became a booming real estate market full of boutique hotels, craft breweries, yoga retreats, and wealthy remote workers willing to pay absurd amounts of money to rediscover simplicity while carrying $1,200 laptops. My little house, bought for $118,000 in 1991, was now worth somewhere around $1.8 million because the lot backed against protected woodland near Grove Park. I never cared much about that. Brandon clearly did. Why, I asked carefully. He shrugged too fast. I don't know, just thinking practically. Practicality is usually expensive when other people recommend it. He ignored that. You're alone here now, Dad. That one hit harder than I expected. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. Eleanor had been gone 19 months by then. Pancreatic cancer. Quick, brutal. One of those diagnoses where doctors start speaking softly before you even sit down. Some nights I still reached across the bed half asleep expecting her shoulder to be there. Grief does that. It rewires reflexes. Brandon softened his tone when he saw my face shift. I'm just saying, maybe you'd be happier somewhere easier to manage. Like where there's a nice gated community outside Charlotte. Ah yes, the American dream. Take an aging parent with emotional attachment to their home and relocate them into beige luxury near a Whole Foods. I stirred my tea slowly. I like Asheville. Sure, but... And I like my porch, Dad. And I especially like not sharing walls with strangers named Gary who own indoor exercise bicycles. That got another reluctant laugh. For a moment, the tension eased again. Then Brandon made the mistake. Small mistake, tiny. But greed rarely arrives alone. It usually brings impatience with it. His phone buzzed again on the counter between us. He grabbed it too slowly for someone with my observational background standing 6 feet away. I saw the email preview. Just a fragment. But enough. Asheville Appraisal Company. Property assessment draft. Interesting. Very interesting. Brandon noticed my eyes move toward the screen and flipped the phone face down immediately. Too immediately. What's that? I asked casually. Nothing. Work. Must be important. Just client stuff. Now pay attention to this next part. People lie differently depending on whether they prepared for the lie beforehand. Prepared lies arrive smoothly. Unexpected lies arrive in pieces. Brandon's answer came in pieces. That told me everything. I nodded slowly and let it go. That's another thing years of investigations taught me. Never interrupt somebody while they're making a mistake. The silence afterwards stretched long enough to become uncomfortable, so Brandon filled it. You know the market's insane right now, he said. Properties around here are getting snapped up fast. Sounds stressful, it's opportunity. Those are usually the same thing wearing different ties. He rubbed the back of his neck. Nervous habit from childhood. Used to do it before admitting he broke something. Then came the next question. The one that truly settled something cold in my stomach. You still keeping all your financial records in that filing cabinet? There it was again. Not memories, not family photos, financial records. I smiled faintly. Why, no reason, just wondering if everything's organized. Barry, you should probably let somebody else know where things are. I looked at him carefully. Somebody else. He held my gaze for exactly 2 seconds before looking away. Just in case. Just in case. You ever notice how greed likes vague language? It hides behind practical phrasing because honesty sounds ugly out loud. What Brandon wanted to say was, in case you die. But decent people struggle saying certain things directly, even when they're thinking them constantly. The conversation drifted after that. Sports, traffic, mortgage rates, surface level father son material. But the room felt different now, smaller somehow, like we were both pretending not to stand near the truth. Before leaving, Brandon walked toward the hallway and paused near the gray filing cabinet, just for a second. His fingers touched the top drawer lightly. Tap, 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 like a man mentally measuring a safe he planned to open later. Then he smiled at me. I worry about you, Dad. And here's the part I need you to understand. I think a small piece of him meant it. That's what made this tragedy instead of villainy. Human beings are complicated enough to love you and calculate your value at the same time. After he left, I sat alone in the kitchen listening to the refrigerator hum while rain hit the windows over the sink. I kept replaying the email preview in my head. Appraisal, assessment draft, property. At 8:14 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was Martha. You alive, the text read. Unfortunately. 3 dots appeared immediately. That means Brandon visited. I laughed despite myself. 5 minutes later, she was sitting across from me at the kitchen table wearing a UNC hoodie and eating leftover peach cobbler straight from the container. I told her everything. Every question, every glance, every little shift in Brandon's tone. Martha listened quietly, which for her was the emotional equivalent of lowering flags to half-staff. Finally, she set the spoon down. Quinton, she said carefully, I think your son is trying to estimate your life in dollar signs. That sentence sat between us for a long time, because deep down I already knew she was right. Then came the mistake Brandon made because greedy people are allergic to patience. Monday arrived with its usual gray clouds hanging over Asheville, but somehow it felt heavier that morning, like the air knew something was about to happen. I had already walked to the mailbox on Maple Street, noting the usual stack of bills and the occasional flyer from Mountain View Realty, which always tried to make my home look more marketable than it actually was. My Ford Ranger sat crookedly in the driveway, its dented fender catching the dull light. I swear that dent grows every winter, probably fueled by the stress of taxes and neighborhood gossip. Brandon pulled up at exactly 4:32 p.m. Precision. Predictability. The hallmarks of someone who believes everything in life is negotiable except the time of his arrival. He stepped out wearing that tailored charcoal blazer, the one that hugs his shoulders like it was painted on, and loafers that shine far too bright for walking down any street that isn't uptown Charlotte. In his hand, he carried a black leather laptop bag and a folder carefully balanced as though the universe might tip if he held them any differently. Hey, Dad, he said, walking through the back door. That practiced smile, too perfect, too polished. The kind that says, I've rehearsed this interaction a dozen times, and I know exactly how to get what I want. Hey, yourself, I said, brushing dust from my sleeves. Don't trip on your way to try and buy my approval. He chuckled nervously. That laugh, sharp, forced, told me more than any words could. I had been noticing micro-expressions like this for decades. Subtle eyebrow twitches, the way someone shifts weight from one foot to the other, the small, involuntary flick of an eye toward a forbidden object. Brandon's gaze flicked toward the filing cabinet in the corner, the gray one with 4 drawers labeled confidential estate documents. His fingers hovered a fraction above the top drawer, not touching it, but just close enough to suggest his intentions. That was the second giveaway. He set the folder down on the counter with exaggerated care, as if it contained secrets that might ignite the house if mishandled. He opened it slowly, pretending to search for something trivial, but I could see the faint glint of panic in his eyes, the hint of a miscalculation forming. Just some documents I wanted you to glance over, he said casually. That casual tone was supposed to mask urgency. He assumed I wouldn't notice the email preview from Asheville Appraisal Company glowing faintly on the laptop screen, a draft property assessment for my house. I did notice, and I smiled. He froze mid-breath. His forced grin faltered, and he attempted to cover it with a cough that sounded more like a dying bird than a human being. I leaned casually against the counter, my iced tea in hand, allowing the silence to stretch. Silence, after all, is a tool people often underestimate. In moments like these, it forces the greedy to reveal themselves in ways even they cannot control. "You've been busy," I said, my tone light. "Assessments, evaluations, all that fun stuff." Brandon's hands twitched ever so slightly. That twitch, a tiny involuntary motion, was a signal as loud to me as any confession. "Just making sure everything's accurate," he replied. "Accurate?" I asked, lifting an eyebrow. "Are you checking my life in numbers now?" He hesitated. He tried to laugh. It came out as a strangled noise somewhere between amusement and panic. I sipped my tea, letting the moment linger. That's the thing about observation. You let people dig their own holes while you sit back with a calm face, smiling politely. "You know," I said softly, "it's funny. Most people think impatience is harmless. But it's amazing how often impatience and greed walk hand in hand." Brandon swallowed. His throat moved nervously. He wasn't used to anyone seeing through the performative layers he'd built so meticulously over the years. He shifted near the counter, glancing again at the filing cabinet. The corner of his mouth twitched, the subtle tell of someone about to overreach. That was the third giveaway. I made a mental note. One day this exact twitch would make the difference. "Dad, you still keeping all your financial records in that cabinet?" he asked too casually for the situation. I looked at him steadily. "I do." "Why?" "Just making sure everything's organized. For, you know, the future." Ah, there it was. The infamous future phrasing. Greedy people hide their intentions behind practical words, thinking that if they sound polite, no one will notice the underlying calculation. But I notice. I always notice. "Future," I echoed softly. "You mean your future?" He laughed again, strained involuntary. Classic mistake number 4. People always reveal themselves through laughter when they're nervous. I walked over to the filing cabinet, ran a finger across the top drawer without opening it. "You know, most people think life's complicated," I said. "Turns out it's usually just people trying to simplify it in ways that benefit themselves." Brandon looked down at the folder, then back at me. His eyes flickered like a candle in the wind. He was trying to measure how much I knew, how much he could push, how far he could go before the truth became dangerous for him. "Just making sure everything's in order," he said, fumbling slightly with the folder. I nodded, calm as a mountain lake. "Of course. Order is important, especially when you forget who's actually holding the ledger." He paused. "Ledger." "You heard me," I said. "Ledger. Not just numbers, intentions, motives, actions. All of them. I noticed things." He swallowed. I could see it in his throat, the way it moved rapidly, a subtle betrayal. He wanted to act to correct the record to secure his future, but he had already revealed his hand. For a long minute we stood there, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the kitchen. His attempts at casual conversation faltered. He tried to talk about Charlotte traffic, the market, even the ridiculous price of gas, but every word stumbled under the weight of what he had just shown me. Finally he closed the folder, slid the laptop back into the bag, smiled. Too wide, too forced. "I better get going," he said, picking up his coffee thermos, which had been untouched. As he walked to the door, he paused one last time near the filing cabinet. Just a fraction of a second. His fingers hovered over the drawer again. Tap, tap, tap. Like a man measuring a safe he plans to open later. I watched him leave. The BMW's engine hummed as he pulled onto Maple Street. I leaned against the counter and allowed myself a small, private chuckle. Later, Martha called. Alive, her text read. I responded with barely. She showed up 10 minutes later with a plate of peach cobbler and her piercing stare that could read souls. I told her everything, the twitch, the email, the draft letter. She shook her head and laughed softly. "Quinton," she said, "he's trying to estimate your life in dollar signs. Don't forget to remind him who still knows the math." And that's exactly what I intended to do. Quiet revenge, after all, isn't about shouting. It's about letting people reveal themselves while you stay 2 steps ahead. Calm, patient, and smiling politely. Brandon had just made that possible. That night, after Martha left and the peach cobbler container sat abandoned on my kitchen counter like evidence from a friendly crime scene, I stood alone in the hallway staring at the gray filing cabinet. 4 drawers, 30 years of paper, 30 years of people underestimating me. Eleanor used to joke that if the FBI ever raided our house, they'd leave halfway through the first drawer because even federal agents have emotional limits. She wasn't entirely wrong. I unlocked the cabinet around 11:40 p.m. while an October storm rolled over Asheville hard enough to rattle the windows. Rain tapped against the glass above the sink, and somewhere outside, wind moved through the oak trees lining Maple Street with that low whispering sound mountains get at night. I pulled open the second drawer: tax records, property deeds, insurance files, trust documentation, and buried beneath all of that the old habits I never fully stopped practicing. You spend 27 years working forensic probate investigations, you don't just retire from noticing things. That part of your brain stays awake forever. It's like owning a smoke detector that never stops listening. Now, most people hear forensic accounting and imagine boring men in beige rooms arguing about spreadsheets. No. What I did was closer to behavioral investigation with calculators. I tracked greed. I followed lies through paperwork. I learned how desperation leaves fingerprints people don't realize they're creating. And Brandon, God bless him, was leaving fingerprints everywhere. I carried 3 folders to the kitchen table along with my old Canon scanner, a yellow legal pad, and the reading glasses Eleanor bought me from CVS 3 years before she died. She hated when I used the cheap drugstore ones. Quinton Butler, she used to say, you spent half your career testifying in courtrooms. Buy respectable glasses. I still use the cheap ones out of stubbornness. Marriage doesn't really end when somebody dies. It just turns into one-sided arguments while making coffee. I scanned the appraisal company letter first, then the partial email screenshot I'd photographed earlier while Brandon was pretending to answer a text message. Then I started cross-checking names. Here's something people don't know about old investigators we keep contacts. At 12:17 a.m., I called Samuel Price. Now, Sam was 72 years old, semi-retired, and had the posture of a disappointed bloodhound. He'd been an estate attorney in Asheville since before most modern influencers learned to spell entrepreneur. He answered on the third ring. "You know what time it is?" he asked immediately. "You still awake?" "That's not an answer. I found something interesting." Long pause. "Then I'll put coffee on." That's friendship among old men. No emotional speeches, just caffeine and implied concern. I drove across Asheville in the rain with windshield wipers squeaking like depressed mice. Sam lived in a small brick house near Montfort Avenue surrounded by stacks of law journals nobody else on earth had opened voluntarily since the Clinton administration. He opened the door wearing plaid pajama pants and a University of Tennessee sweatshirt. "You look terrible," he said. "Good. Means I still resemble my tax returns." Inside his office smelled like coffee dust and old paper. Comforting smells. Honest smells. I spread the documents across his desk while he adjusted his glasses. For 15 straight minutes, neither of us spoke. Just paper turning, rain outside, coffee cups moving slowly. Finally, Sam leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said carefully, "your son's either preparing for your future or accelerating toward it emotionally. That's lawyer language for 'this looks bad,' isn't it?" Yes. He tapped the appraisal company letter. This wasn't casual curiosity. No. And this email trail here, he slid one page toward me. This is the interesting part. There it was, an inquiry Brandon had sent to Asheville Appraisal Company asking for preliminary valuation estimates regarding transitional ownership scenarios. Transitional ownership scenarios. See what I mean about greedy people hiding behind business language? Nobody says, "Hey, how much money can I make once my father is gone?" Instead, they say, transitional ownership scenario. Corporate America invented vocabulary specifically to help guilt wear a necktie. Sam kept reading quietly. Then his eyebrows lifted. "Oh, that's stupid." "What?" He rotated the paper toward me. Brandon had accidentally included my full property parcel number in an external inquiry to a secondary investment group in Charlotte. Now listen carefully because this part matters. Parcel numbers are precise. Public, yes, but precise. Including it meant Brandon wasn't casually wondering about the property anymore. He was actively discussing its potential transfer value. Before my death. That's the kind of mistake greedy people make when impatience outruns caution. I sat back slowly in the chair, and honestly, that hurt worse than I expected. You can prepare intellectually for disappointment and still get blindsided emotionally by it. I stared at the rain crawling down Sam's office window and suddenly remembered Brandon at 9 years old building Lego castles on my living room floor while Eleanor made grilled cheese sandwiches. That little boy used to run toward me when I got home from work. Now grown-up Brandon was discussing ownership transitions like I was a commercial building with blood pressure. Sam must have seen something shift in my face because his tone softened. You okay? Not particularly. Want the truth? I hired you for 20 years specifically because you never softened the truth. He nodded once. Then here it is. Your son's under financial pressure. How can you tell? Because financially comfortable people move slower. That sat heavily between us. And deep down I knew Sam was right. Brandon had been escalating too quickly. More visits, more questions, more urgency. Pressure creates speed, speed creates mistakes, and mistakes create trails. By 1:43 a.m., we'd mapped out enough information to sketch the outline of what Brandon had probably been doing. Not stealing, not forging documents, not yet, but preparing, positioning himself, exploring options, testing how close he could get to the estate machinery before I noticed. Unfortunately for him, noticing things used to be my profession. Sam looked at me carefully over the rim of his coffee mug. So what are you going to do? Good question. Great question, actually. Because anger is easy. Anybody can explode. Anybody can scream. But quiet people, observant people, we tend to become dangerous differently. I folded the appraisal letter slowly. I'm going to wait. Sam blinked. That's it. No. I smiled faintly. I'm going to let him keep talking. Now, you might think that sounds cold. Manipulative, even. Maybe it was. But I need you to understand something very important. When someone is revealing their character to you, voluntarily interrupting them too early is a mistake. People eventually confess who they are through patterns. You just need patience long enough to listen. At 2:10 in the morning, I drove home through empty Asheville streets glowing wet under traffic lights. The city looked peaceful. Quiet breweries closed for the night. Sidewalks empty except for one guy in a raincoat walking a golden retriever that looked emotionally exhausted. I parked beside the house and sat inside the truck for a minute, listening to the engine tick softly. Then I looked at my home, the porch Eleanor painted herself, the upstairs bedroom window where she used to wave at me when I came home late, the kitchen where Brandon learned multiplication tables eating cereal at 6 in the morning before school. A house remembers things even when people start forgetting what mattered inside it. And somewhere between grief and disappointment, I realized something painful. Brandon thought he was preparing to inherit property. What he was really risking was the last honest relationship left in his life. By Friday afternoon, I had enough to break my own heart twice. Friday came like a subtle warning, the kind of day when the clouds hang heavy, but nothing falls yet, just enough moisture in the air to make your thoughts feel denser. I woke at 6:15 a.m., as usual, brewed my black coffee strong enough to sting the tongue, and sat at the kitchen table scanning the piles of documents Brandon had inadvertently left behind during his past visits. The drizzle outside made the mountains look ghostly, almost like watercolor smudges, and I found a strange comfort in their stillness. Martha called around 7 o'clock. You up yet? She asked, as if she hadn't seen me since last Tuesday. Barely, I replied, glancing at the filing cabinet. You're quiet this morning. I like it, she said. Quiet is underrated. It's the perfect weapon when someone is trying to probe your intentions, as Brandon had been all week. By 8:45 a.m., I was cross-referencing the preliminary valuation emails from Asheville Appraisal Company with the letters from Mountain View Realty, making a mental map of every property interaction Brandon had tried to manipulate. My skills from years as a forensic probate accountant kicked in naturally. It was almost meditative. Each document, each email, each mention of potential interest or future assessment became a thread in a tapestry Brandon had unknowingly woven himself. Around 10:30, my phone buzzed. A text from Brandon. Can we talk today? About the estate. I stared at it for a moment. He wanted a conversation, but he didn't know I already had all the evidence I needed. I responded casually. Sure, afternoon, 6:30 works. No sense of urgency. Let him think he was steering the ship. All day I prepared. I walked the house, checking locks, reviewing my notes, sipping coffee in quiet contemplation. Each step a rehearsal, each glance at the filing cabinet a reminder of the cards I held. By 3 p.m., the storm outside intensified. Not heavy, just persistent. Rain blurred the mountains behind the house into an impressionistic painting of gray and green. Perfect. Ambiance matters when you're about to confront greed. Brandon arrived precisely at 6:27 p.m. Impressive, I thought. Punctuality is the first sign of someone trying too hard. He stepped out of the BMW wearing a tailored navy blazer over a white dress shirt, polished shoes, and that same confident smirk I'd come to recognize. But something was off. Slight hesitation in his stride, a tiny flick of nervousness in his eyes. Claire was with him. She looked anxious, flipping her hair once and checking her phone as if it could shield her from reality. We sat in the dining room, pot roast steaming from the oven, cornbread warm on a platter, a bottle of local red wine uncorked and waiting. Attention to detail matters. Food soothes nerves, and nerves would be tested tonight. I cleared my throat. I've been thinking about the estate, I said softly, letting the words hang. Brandon leaned forward immediately, hands clasped together on the table. About what, Dad? About where it's going. I sipped my wine. I'm considering leaving most of it to the Asheville Community Fund. Claire gasped softly. Brandon blinked. His fingers drummed against the table, a silent manifestation of inner panic. He tried to mask it with a calm, "That's generous. Generous." Ha! I watched him closely analyzing micro-movements, the way his gaze darted to the top drawer of the filing cabinet behind me, the tightening of his jaw, the subtle flare of nostrils. Greed wears its own signature. Of course, I continued, I'll leave a small portion for family, but the majority goes to support education, community programs, and local families who can't afford the luxuries we take for granted. Brandon nodded, but I saw it. That flicker. The thought of losing control. He swallowed and tried to mask the panic with questions about how much, how it would be executed, yet all the while he was revealing more than he realized. Dad, he said finally, what about me? What about what I'm owed? I raised an eyebrow. Owed. Yes, you know everything. His voice betrayed him, the slightest crack in tone. A child still trapped in adult skin attempting to negotiate a life he thought he had earned by default. You mean your inheritance, I said gently. That's not owed. That's a gift contingent on character and choice. He looked down at the table, lips pressing into a thin line. He was trying to calculate, to reason, to salvage something from a conversation he thought he controlled. Claire reached for his hand but recoiled quickly when he flinched. The guilt and fear were subtle but unmistakable. She understood what I already knew. The trap was set, and Brandon had just walked right into it. I sipped my wine again. You see, patience is a virtue that few people practice well. But impatience? I paused, letting my eyes meet his, often leaves traces. He blinked. That's all. But it was enough. I gestured to the drawer behind me casually. You've been curious about these for weeks, haven't you? Curious? He said, voice tight. Go on, I prompted. You've got everything documented so meticulously, he stammered. I just wanted to make sure nothing gets overlooked, that's all. That's when I smiled faintly. The evidence he had inadvertently left behind, the missteps, the rush, the impatience, they had all been quietly cataloged. Every email, every inquiry, every glance toward the cabinet was now part of a narrative that only I fully understood. Martha would have called this letting him dig his own pit. And she was right. We finished dinner in silence, the tension thick but controlled. Brandon's mind raced, recalculating every move, every question he had asked in the past 2 weeks. Claire tried to break the silence with small talk, but the words fell flat. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside the room. As he left, I noticed a small trickle of sweat at the back of his neck. A man trying to appear composed while realizing his plan was already in motion and failing. I walked to the window after hearing the BMW fade down Maple Street. The rain had slowed, leaving a faint rainbow behind the mountains. A reminder that even after storms, small traces of beauty remain. By the time I returned to the kitchen, I had already begun outlining the next steps. Quiet observation, careful planning, waiting. Brandon's impatience had made the work easier for me. He had given himself away, and in doing so, he had allowed me to prepare. This, I thought, is the true nature of quiet revenge. It isn't explosive, it isn't immediate. It's patient, precise, and most importantly, it lets the person reveal themselves fully before any action is taken. I poured myself another glass of wine and picked up the folder he had accidentally left behind. The storm outside had subsided entirely. The mountains looked serene, yet inside the game had just begun. Brandon had stepped into the first layer of my plan, and I was ready to see how far he would go before the inevitable truth emerged. 3 weeks of subtle testing, observation, and patience lay ahead, and I was ready to watch every move. The funny thing about family dinners is that everybody pretends they're about food. They're not. They're about tension management with side dishes. The dinner where I told Brandon about the charity plan happened on a Thursday night at exactly 6:30 p.m. because Brandon respected schedules more than emotions, and I wanted him comfortable enough to lower his guard. People reveal themselves more easily when they think they understand the structure of the evening. I spent most of that afternoon cooking. Pot roast in the oven, slow cooking since noon. Carrots glazed with brown sugar. Cast iron cornbread the way Eleanor used to make it, crispy around the edges, soft in the center. I even opened the bottle of North Carolina Cabernet Claire brought us last Christmas, back when she still believed our family could survive awkward silences with enough expensive wine. Maybe she was right. Maybe none of us tried hard enough. By 5:45, the house smelled like onions, rosemary, and old memories. Rain drifted lightly against the kitchen windows, and the grandfather clock near the hallway ticked loud enough to sound judgmental. I stood at the counter slicing cornbread when Martha walked in through the back door without knocking. Now, before you ask, yes, she always did that. Martha believed friendship outranked property law. She carried a paper cup from Bell's Corner Diner and narrowed her eyes immediately. You're cooking like somebody's getting emotionally executed tonight. That obvious Quinton, you made the good cornbread. You only do that when feelings are involved. Fair point. She leaned against the counter, watching me quietly for a second. You sure about this? No. Good. Means you're still human. I smiled faintly. Martha lowered her voice. You don't have to destroy him. There it was, the assumption beneath the whole situation. That because I saw what Brandon was doing, revenge automatically meant annihilation. But that wasn't what I wanted. I wasn't trying to ruin my son. I was trying to force honesty into a room where greed kept disguising itself as concern. Big difference. At 6:22 p.m., headlights rolled across the front windows. Brandon's BMW, right on time. Martha looked toward the driveway and muttered, "That man arrives like a pharmaceutical commercial." I nearly laughed hard enough to drop the cornbread. She slipped out the back door before they entered because she understood something important. Certain conversations need privacy to become truthful. A moment later, Brandon and Claire stepped inside carrying a bottle of wine and the kind of nervous energy people bring into hospitals and courtrooms. Claire hugged me first, longer than usual. That mattered too. You start noticing how long people hug you once you suspect they're afraid of losing access to your existence. House smells amazing, she said softly. Either dinner or a gas leak, I replied. She smiled weakly. Brandon loosened his coat and glanced around the kitchen quickly, almost unconsciously scanning the room like a businessman checking an unfamiliar conference space. Still measuring, still calculating, but underneath that polished confidence, something looked frayed tonight. Tiny shadows beneath his eyes. Jaw tight. Phone checked too often. Pressure. Samuel Price had been right. Financial pressure speeds people up, and fast people make mistakes. We sat down around 6:41 p.m. while rain tapped steadily against the dining room windows. The table looked warm, inviting, safe. That's the strange part about emotional ambushes inside families. They usually happen surrounded by mashed potatoes. For the first 15 minutes, we stayed in neutral territory. Traffic in Charlotte, mortgage rates, Claire's marketing job, the ridiculous number of tourists crowding downtown Asheville every October, normal family conversation, or at least our version of it. But Brandon kept glancing toward me between sentences, waiting for something. You know that look? like somebody sitting near a fireworks stand holding a match. Finally, around halfway through dinner, I set my fork down carefully. I've been reviewing my estate plans. There it was. The atmosphere changed instantly, not dramatically, quietly. That's how real family tension works. Nobody gasps in real life. Nobody drops wine glasses in slow motion. Instead, people stop chewing for half a second too long. Claire's hand froze near her water glass. Brandon leaned forward slightly. Tiny movement, huge meaning. "Oh," he said carefully. I nodded once. After Eleanor passed, I realized I needed to think seriously about what happens to everything eventually. Brandon's eyes sharpened immediately, not emotionally, strategically. And God help me, that hurt more than anger would have. Because when your child reacts to your mortality, like a financial meeting, some part of your chest caves inward permanently. I kept my voice calm. I've decided to leave most of the estate to the Asheville Community Fund. Silence. Real silence this time. The grandfather clock ticked 3 times. Rain hit the windows. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled softly over the mountains. Claire blinked first. Brandon didn't blink at all. Now pay attention to this next part, because this is where truth starts leaking through cracks people can't control. Brandon smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind people use while mentally recalculating expectations in real time. He cleared his throat. That's generous. Corporate response, emotionally empty. Not, wow, Dad, what inspired that? Not, are you sure? Not even, that's surprising. Straight to controlled diplomacy. I took a sip of wine. I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately. Claire spoke carefully. The scholarship programs they run are really wonderful. See, Claire still instinctively moved toward humanity. Brandon moved toward numbers. Different instincts reveal different souls. He folded his hands together tightly. So, when you say most of the estate, there it was. The math had officially entered the room. I answered calmly. The majority. His jaw tightened almost invisibly. You wouldn't catch it unless you spent decades watching nervous witnesses testify under oath. But I caught it. Oh, I caught all of it. He leaned back in his chair, pretending composure while his knee bounced rapidly beneath the table. Anxiety, calculation, fear. Because suddenly the future he'd been quietly organizing in his head no longer looked guaranteed. Dad, he said slowly, have you really thought this through? I have. All of it. Yes. What about family? Interesting wording. Not, what about me still hiding behind broader language, still trying to sound principled while protecting personal interest? I nodded gently. Family matters very much. Then why give away something you spent your whole life building? Now there's the emotional hook greed often uses. Ownership, entitlement disguised as tradition. I looked directly at him, because I get to decide what my life's work means. Claire stared down into her wine glass. She knew where this conversation was heading before Brandon did. You could see it happening behind her eyes, that quiet realization that somebody she loved had pushed too far too fast. Brandon forced another smile, but this one looked strained enough to crack. Then he said the sentence that confirmed every suspicion I'd had for weeks. What about what I'm owed? There it was. Not love, not grief, not concern. Debt language. Transactional language. The language of inheritance as expectation instead of gratitude. And in that exact moment, sitting beneath the warm dining room lights, Eleanor picked out 12 years earlier listening to rain fall across Maple Street, I realized my son had already emotionally converted me into paperwork. Then Brandon smiled again, and I swear that smile did more damage than shouting ever could. What about what I'm owed? That was the sentence. Not Dad. Are you serious? Not why would you do that? Not even are you okay? Straight to owed. Straight to money. Straight to inheritance. And suddenly the room didn't feel like a dining room anymore. It felt like a negotiation table. Rain slid slowly down the windows behind Brandon while the grandfather clock ticked near the hallway like it was counting down something ugly. Claire looked at him immediately, fast, sharp, that tiny look wives give husbands right before disaster fully arrives. You know the one. The silent, please stop talking. But Brandon didn't stop. Greedy people rarely do. He leaned forward slightly, elbows near the table, wine untouched beside him. What I mean is, he cleared his throat. You spent your whole life building this. The house, mom's investments, everything. Everything. Funny word. Makes human lives sound like storage units. I picked up my wine glass slowly. Cabernet. Local vineyard near Hendersonville. Eleanor liked this one because she said it tasted expensive enough to make us pretend we understand wine. I still miss hearing her laugh in this house. That thought hit me hard for a second. Because here's the part nobody warns you about after losing your spouse. Eventually you stop fearing loneliness. You start fearing disappointment instead. And disappointment was sitting 3 feet away wearing a navy quarter-zip sweater that probably cost $400. I kept my voice calm. Brandon, I said quietly, inheritance isn't salary. His jaw tightened immediately. Tiny movement, big meaning. He forced a smile. I know that. No, I replied softly. I don't think you do. Silence. Short silence. Dangerous silence. Claire reached for her wine glass with both hands now. Nervous habit. I noticed everything that night. The bouncing knee under the table. The way Brandon's fingers kept tapping once against the stem of the glass every time money entered the conversation. Tap, tap, tap. Human beings leak truth through rhythm. I'm just trying to understand, he said carefully. No, I answered. You're trying to calculate. That landed. Oh, it landed hard. He looked down briefly. First crack in the armor. Now listen carefully because this next part matters. Most people think betrayal sounds loud. It doesn't. Real betrayal sounds reasonable. That's what makes it dangerous. Brandon lowered his voice into that calm business tone he used with clients. The Asheville Community Fund already has donors, Dad. Family property is supposed to stay in the family. There it was. Ownership language, legacy language, the kind people use when they've already emotionally claimed something that isn't theirs yet. I leaned back slowly in my chair. You know what's interesting? I asked. What? You never once asked me why I chose the charity. His eyes flickered, quick, almost invisible. But I saw it. Because people focused on love ask emotional questions first. People focused on money skip directly to percentages. Claire finally spoke. Softly, carefully. Quinton, maybe Brandon's just surprised. I nodded gently toward her. He is surprised. Then I looked back at him, because he already had expectations. Brandon exhaled hard through his nose. You're twisting this. No, I'm observing it. That sentence hit him harder than anger would have. You know why? Because angry parents can be dismissed as emotional. Calm parents are terrifying, especially when they're correct. Rain hammered harder against the windows. The dining room lights reflected softly against the dark glass behind Brandon's head, and for one strange second, I suddenly remembered him at 12 years old sitting in this exact room doing algebra homework while Eleanor made pancakes. That memory hurt, a lot. Because somewhere between that little boy and this man sitting across from me, ambition had quietly replaced gratitude. And maybe part of that was my fault too. Parents never escape all responsibility. Not really. Brandon leaned forward again. You think I'm after your money? There it was, finally honest enough to say out loud. I didn't answer immediately. That's another thing investigations taught me. Silence pressures guilty people harder than accusations do. So I let the silence sit there, heavy, uncomfortable. Claire looked like she wanted to disappear through the floorboards. Finally, I asked quietly, why did you contact Asheville Appraisal Company? Everything stopped, completely stopped. The room froze so fast it almost felt physical. Brandon blinked once, twice. Then came the first real panic expression I'd seen from him in weeks, eyes widening slightly, shoulders stiffening, mouth parting before words arrived. You know that look. That, how much does he know look? He recovered quickly, too quickly. What? Appraisal company, I repeated calmly. Property assessment draft. Claire slowly turned toward him. And there it was, the moment, Not the explosion. Not the yelling. The realization. She hadn't known, or at least not fully. Brandon swallowed hard. That wasn't... You used my parcel number, I said softly. His face lost color. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough for me. Enough for Claire. Enough for truth. Now pay attention to this next part because greedy people always make one fatal mistake. They assume silence means ignorance. Brandon had mistaken my patience for weakness. Big mistake. Huge. I was just looking into options, he said quickly. Options. Another corporate word hiding something ugly underneath. Options for what? In case something happens. Something happens. That phrase sat in the middle of the table like roadkill. Not if you pass someday. Not if your health changes. Just something happens. Like I was weather damage. I nodded slowly. And the power of attorney forms that one hit harder. Claire's head snapped toward him so fast I thought she might pull a muscle. What she whispered. Brandon looked trapped now. Actually trapped. Because the problem with layered lies is eventually one truth exposes all of them at once. I can explain that, he said quickly. No, Claire said quietly. Actually, I'd love to hear this. Oof. See, that right there. That's the sound of a marriage entering dangerous water. Brandon rubbed both hands down his face. For the first time all night, he looked less like a confident businessman and more like an exhausted man drowning in decisions he made too fast. And honestly, that almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. I wasn't trying to hurt you, he muttered. There it was, the closest thing to honesty so far. I looked at him carefully. I believe that. He seemed surprised by my answer, but hurting someone and valuing them correctly are two different things. Another silence. This one sadder. Claire stared down at the tablecloth while Brandon avoided looking at either of us. And suddenly, nobody in the room seemed hungry anymore. The pot roast sat untouched, wine glasses half full, rain slowing outside, a family quietly cracking open at the dinner table Eleanor once filled with laughter. I stood slowly and carried my plate toward the kitchen sink. No dramatic speech, no shouting. That's not how real heartbreak works. Real heartbreak folds napkins carefully while trying not to look devastated. Behind me, Brandon finally spoke again. Quiet now. Smaller somehow. Dad. I didn't turn around immediately, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is make somebody sit alone with what they've revealed. Then Brandon smiled again. And I swear that smile did more damage than shouting ever could. Nobody moved for a few seconds after that. Not me. Not Brandon. Not Claire. Just the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway like an impatient witness waiting for somebody to finally tell the truth. Tick, tick, tick. I stood at the kitchen sink staring out into the dark backyard while rainwater slid down the porch railing Eleanor painted 12 summers ago. Behind me, Brandon cleared his throat. Dad, I think you're blowing this out of proportion. There it was. The defense mechanism. Not denial. Minimization. Classic. You don't minimize something unless deep down you already know it's real. I dried my hands slowly with a dish towel. Still calm. Still quiet. That's the thing Brandon never understood about me. He thought calm meant weak. He thought soft voices meant soft minds. Big mistake. I turned around carefully. No, I said. I think I've been underreacting for weeks. Claire looked down immediately, because she knew. Not everything, but enough. Enough to understand this dinner had stopped being about inheritance 20 minutes ago. Now it was about character. I walked slowly toward the gray filing cabinet near the hallway, and that's when Brandon's face changed. You know that moment in movies where somebody realizes the gun was loaded the entire time? Like that. Only quieter. More human. His eyes locked onto the cabinet, then onto me, then back again. Panic moves fast through the face when somebody suddenly understands they are no longer controlling the conversation. I unlocked the top drawer. Metal click. Small sound. Huge meaning. Then I pulled out the yellow envelope. Now let me tell you something about evidence. Real evidence doesn't need dramatic presentation. Truth becomes terrifying all by itself once it's organized properly. I carried the envelope back to the dining table and placed it directly in front of Brandon. Softly. No slam. No theatrics. That frightened him more than yelling would have. "Open it," I said. His fingers hesitated. Claire whispered, "Brandon." But he already knew, or at least part of him did. He slid one document halfway out and immediately froze. Asheville Appraisal Company, property valuation request. My parcel number. His email address. His inquiry. Everything. The color drained from his face slowly, like somebody turning down dimmer switches one notch at a time. I sat down calmly across from him. "You know what your problem is?" I asked quietly. He stared at the papers, not answering, still hoping silence might rescue him somehow. "You assumed old age meant blindness." That hit hard. I saw it land physically. His shoulders dropped slightly. His breathing changed. The room suddenly felt smaller. Claire reached toward the papers carefully and pulled another page free. Her eyes widened immediately. "What is this? Ah!" There it was. The second wave. Because the first document was bad. But the second one worse. Draft power of attorney forms. Downloaded, annotated, prepared. Not signed, but prepared. Claire looked at Brandon like she didn't fully recognize him anymore. "Why would you even have these?" Brandon rubbed both hands over his face, hard enough to leave red marks across his cheeks. "I was planning ahead." "No," I said softly. "You were positioning yourself." Another silence. Heavy now. Painfully heavy. Outside, thunder rolled low over Asheville. The storm sounded closer. Or maybe everything just felt louder once the pretending stopped. Brandon looked up at me finally. Anger now. Good. Anger meant fear had nowhere left to hide. "You went through my stuff," I almost laughed. Honestly. That question coming from a man trying to quietly prepare ownership transfer plans for his still-living father was almost impressive in its lack of self-awareness. "You brought half this material into my house yourself. That's not the point." "No," I replied calmly. "The point is you were discussing my property like I was already gone." His jaw clenched. Claire stared at him in disbelief. And suddenly I realized something heartbreaking. This might have been the first truly honest moment in their marriage in months. Because greed doesn't only poison families, it poisons intimacy too. You start hiding calculations from everyone eventually, even people you love, especially people you love. Brandon leaned back hard in the chair. "This isn't fair." Fair? Interesting word. People rarely bring up fairness until consequences arrive. I folded my hands together calmly. "You contacted investment groups." Silence. "You explored transitional ownership structures." More silence. "You requested preliminary liquidation estimates." Claire looked physically ill now. "Liquidation," she whispered. "Oops." That one slipped out faster than Brandon wanted. His head snapped toward her. "It wasn't like that." "How exactly was it?" she asked quietly. Now listen carefully because this next part matters. The most dangerous moment in family betrayal is not discovery. It's exposure. Because betrayal survives in darkness. Once everybody sees it clearly, the betrayer loses control of the narrative. And Brandon was losing control fast. "I was stressed," he muttered finally. There it was. First real truth of the night. Not greed. Pressure. Pressure underneath greed. I nodded once. "I know." That surprised him. Probably because he expected rage. But anger wasn't the point anymore. Understanding was worse. "I know about the Charlotte investment property." I continued quietly. His eyes widened. "I know about the business loans." Claire slowly turned toward him again. "Oh boy." Another thing she didn't know. "And I know I said carefully that you're drowning, trying to maintain a lifestyle you can't actually afford." Dead silence. Brandon looked shattered now. Not exposed financially. Exposed emotionally. Because underneath all the expensive watches and polished confidence and luxury SUVs was just a scared little boy terrified of looking unsuccessful. And honestly, that almost broke my heart more than the greed itself. Almost. Claire spoke softly. "Brandon, is this true?" He didn't answer immediately. That told her everything. She leaned back slowly in her chair, arms crossing tightly over her chest like she suddenly felt cold. You told me everything was fine. I was handling it. No, she whispered. You were hiding it. Boom. There it is. Family betrayal spreads sideways once truth enters the room. Nobody escapes untouched. I looked down at the yellow envelope for a moment before speaking again. You know the saddest part, I asked quietly. Neither of them answered. You could have just told me the truth. Brandon stared down at the table. Tears weren't coming. Men like Brandon don't cry easily, not because they're strong, because they spent too many years confusing vulnerability with failure. I would have helped you, I said. That finally got him to look up. Real shock this time. Not strategic, not defensive, human. I'm your father, I continued softly. But somewhere along the line, you stopped seeing me as family and started seeing me as inventory. That sentence broke something. I saw it happen. His entire posture collapsed inward slightly. Not dramatic, real. Human beings rarely fall apart all at once. Usually they cave slowly from the center. Claire wiped at her eyes quietly. Rain softened outside. The storm was passing. Funny how nature does that sometimes, right when people are unraveling indoors. Nobody spoke for almost a full minute. Then Brandon finally whispered, I didn't know how to fix it. And there it was. The truth underneath all the greed. Fear. Fear of failure, fear of losing status, fear of becoming ordinary after spending years pretending to be extraordinary. I believed him. That's the tragic part. I actually believed him. But belief doesn't erase damage. And trust once converted into paperwork never fully returns to its original shape. I stood slowly and gathered the documents back into the yellow envelope. Carefully. Methodically. Like a man packing away evidence from a crime scene nobody expected to happen inside their own dining room. Then I looked directly at my son and asked the question that had been haunting me for weeks. When did I become an asset instead of your father? Nobody answered, because some questions hurt too much once the room finally becomes honest. But revenge, even quiet revenge, still leaves dishes in the sink afterward. After that question, nobody touched their food again. The pot roast went cold. The cornbread hardened at the edges, and the grandfather clock in the hallway kept ticking like time itself was uncomfortable being inside that room. When did I become an asset? Instead of your father? I can still hear the silence that followed. Not ordinary silence, the kind that settles into your bones. Brandon stared down at the tablecloth while Claire quietly wiped tears from beneath her eyes using the edge of a napkin. And me, I just stood there holding the yellow envelope like it weighed more than paper should. Funny thing about evidence. You spend your whole life thinking truth will feel satisfying once you finally uncover it. Sometimes it just feels lonely. Brandon pushed his chair back first. Slowly. Not angry anymore. That surprised me. I expected shouting, defensiveness, maybe accusations. Instead, he looked exhausted. Like a man who had been carrying too many lies for too long and suddenly realized they'd become too heavy to hold upright. I should go, he muttered. Claire looked at him immediately. Brandon, I said I should go. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Tiny crack. Human crack. Then he grabbed his coat from the back of the chair, too fast knocking his wine glass sideways. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth Eleanor bought from Charleston 20 years ago. And Lord help me, that stupid little detail nearly broke my heart more than the argument itself, because Eleanor loved this tablecloth, protected it like family heirloom treasure. No red wine near the lace she used to warn every Thanksgiving, and now here we were, family collapsing, wine bleeding across white fabric, exactly the kind of symbolism therapists probably make fortunes discussing. Claire stood quickly. Wait. But Brandon was already moving toward the front door, fast now. People leave quickly when rooms become mirrors. The front door opened, cold mountain air swept inside. Then the door slammed hard enough to rattle the hallway picture frames. Gone. Just like that. Claire stood frozen near the dining room table, looking completely shattered. Not dramatic shattered, real shattered. The kind where somebody's entire understanding of their marriage suddenly develops cracks all at once. She looked toward me slowly. I didn't know about the power of attorney forms. I believed her. That's the thing. After decades investigating lies, you learn the difference between guilt and collateral damage. Claire wasn't driving this disaster. She was standing too close to it. I sighed softly and grabbed paper towels from the kitchen. Well, I said quietly, blotting wine from the tablecloth, your husband inherited his mother's inability to hold a wine glass during emotional events. That startled a laugh out of her. Tiny laugh. Wet-eyed and broken. But real. Sometimes humor is the only bridge left between people after difficult truths. Claire sat down slowly while I worked at the stain. You're being nicer than I deserve, she whispered. I looked up. You didn't betray me. No, she said softly. I just ignored things I shouldn't have ignored. Ah, there it was. Self-awareness. Painful, but honest. I nodded slowly. Most family disasters don't happen because of one villain, Claire. They happen because people keep postponing uncomfortable conversations. She stared down at her hands. I knew he was stressed. How bad? Bad enough that he stopped sleeping properly. That didn't surprise me. Pressure leaves physical fingerprints long before emotional collapse arrives. Claire swallowed hard. The Charlotte property investment failed 6 months ago. Interesting. Earlier than I expected. He kept trying to recover the losses, she continued. Then more loans happened, then refinancing, then another project. She shook her head slowly. Every time something failed, he doubled down harder because he thought success was one deal away. That sentence hit me harder than I expected, because suddenly I could see it clearly. Not just greed, panic. Brandon wasn't trying to become rich anymore. He was trying not to become exposed. Big difference. I carried the ruined tablecloth carefully into the kitchen sink. The red stain remained faintly visible beneath the running water. Some marks don't disappear completely no matter how quickly you respond. That's true for fabric. Also true for families. Claire appeared quietly beside me. What happens now? Good question. Complicated question. Because revenge stories online always end neatly. People love neat endings. The villain loses everything. The hero walks away victorious. Music plays, credits roll. Real life leaves emotional debris everywhere. I'm changing the estate plan, I said calmly. She nodded immediately. I understand. And before you ask, yes, most of it still goes to the Asheville Community Fund. Another nod. No argument. Just sadness now. But I continued carefully. I'm establishing a trust for Emily. Her eyes widened slightly. My granddaughter, 7 years old, gap-toothed smile, obsessed with dinosaurs and blueberry pancakes, still pure enough to hug people without hidden agendas. A trust, Claire asked softly. Yes. For college. For life, I answered. Structured carefully, protected. No direct access until she's mature enough to understand money without worshiping it. Claire cried quietly then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears sliding down tired cheeks while rain tapped gently against the kitchen windows. I'm sorry, she whispered, and here's the part I need you to understand. I believed her, completely, because apologies sound different when they come from people who no longer think they can gain anything from you. I made fresh coffee around 10:15 p.m. because apparently emotional devastation still pairs nicely with caffeine in North Carolina. Claire sat at the kitchen table wrapped in one of Eleanor's old cardigans while I called Samuel Price. He answered immediately. You sound tired, he said. I hosted family dinner. Oh dear God, exactly why we stayed friends for 40 years. I explained everything quietly while Claire stared out the window toward Maple Street. Samuel listened carefully. Then, you okay? No, I admitted honestly. That surprised even me, but there's a point where pride becomes emotional dishonesty, and I was too old for that. After the call ended, Claire spoke softly from the table. He loves you. I looked at her for a long moment. Maybe I said carefully, but somewhere along the way he started loving success more. That sentence stayed in the room a while. Heavy, sad, true. Around 11 p.m., Claire finally stood to leave. At the front door, she hesitated, then hugged me tightly. Long hug, real hug. No calculation in it, just grief. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. Neither did I. That's another thing revenge stories rarely mention. Exposure doesn't automatically create healing. Sometimes it just creates honesty. And honesty hurts before it helps. After she left, I walked slowly through the house, turning off lights one room at a time. Dining room, kitchen, hallway, living room. The house felt enormous suddenly, too quiet. I stopped beside the gray filing cabinet and rested my hand against the cold metal. 30 years documenting strangers destroying their families over money. And somehow I still never imagined it happening this close to home. Around midnight, I sat alone on the porch swing, listening to rainwater drip from the gutters, while my old Ford Ranger sat under the street lamp looking tired and dependable. A lot like me, honestly. Then my phone buzzed. Text message from Martha. Well, I stared at the screen for a second before typing back. Turns out heartbreak looks very professional in a navy blazer. 3 dots appeared instantly. Then her reply. Coffee tomorrow, 8 a.m. And wear the good flannel. You look emotionally bankrupt in the green one. I laughed out loud for the first time all night. Tiny laugh, but real. And somehow that small moment of warmth mattered more than revenge ever could. 3 weeks later, Brandon came back not as a businessman, not as an heir, but as a son who finally looked tired enough to tell the truth. 3 weeks passed before I saw Brandon again. 3 quiet weeks. 3 long mornings at Bell's Corner Diner pretending I wasn't checking the front window every time the bell above the door rang. Martha noticed, of course. That woman could detect emotional avoidance from 3 zip codes away. You keep staring at the door like a Labrador waiting for a divorced owner, she muttered. One Tuesday while refilling my coffee. I'm people watching. You're grief watching. Fair point. Outside Asheville had fully shifted into late October. Cold mornings. Wet leaves sticking to sidewalks. Tourists wandering downtown wearing flannel shirts they bought 2 hours earlier trying to look mountain authentic. The city looked beautiful. I felt tired. That's the strange thing about family betrayal. Even when you're right, it still exhausts you, especially when revenge succeeds. Because quiet revenge doesn't give you adrenaline. It gives you clarity, and clarity can feel lonely as hell. By the second week, Claire had texted me twice. Short messages. Emily misses you. Thank you for protecting her future. Nothing manipulative, nothing strategic, just honest. I appreciated that. Brandon. Nothing. No calls, no texts, no apology. Part of me was angry about that. Another part understood exactly why he stayed away. Shame makes people disappear before it makes them honest. Then on a Thursday morning around 7:50 a.m., Martha looked over my shoulder toward the diner window and said quietly, well, speak of the financially irresponsible devil. I turned, and there he was, Brandon. Standing outside Bell's Corner Diner in a dark jacket with both hands shoved into his pockets against the cold. But something was different. No BMW. That got my attention immediately. Instead, he climbed out of an old gray Honda Accord that looked borrowed. His hair wasn't perfectly styled. His shoulders looked heavier somehow. And for the first time in years, he didn't look successful. He looked human. Martha watched him carefully through the glass. Oh, she said softly. Life finally got a hold of him. Then she squeezed my shoulder once before walking away toward the kitchen. No speeches, no advice, just support. That's real friendship. The bell above the diner door jingled softly when Brandon walked inside. People glanced up briefly before returning to their breakfast. Small-town diners are wonderful that way. Everybody notices drama. Nobody interrupts it. Brandon stood awkwardly near the table for a second. You mind if I sit? I looked at the empty booth across from me. Depends. You bringing emotional damage or honesty this morning? To my surprise, he actually smiled a little. Small smile. Tired smile. Hopefully honesty. That was new. He sat down slowly. Close up, he looked awful. Dark circles under his eyes, unshaven, hands restless against the coffee mug Martha placed in front of him without asking. She also charged him for extra bacon before walking away. Because Martha believes emotional support should still maintain financial accountability. Honestly, I respect that. For about 30 seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Brandon exhaled hard. I lost the Charlotte property. Straight to it. No warm-up. Interesting. I nodded once. I assumed. The bank took it Monday. There it was. Collapse. Real collapse. Not theoretical anymore. He stared down into his coffee. I kept thinking I could recover everything before anyone noticed. You mean before Claire noticed? That landed immediately. He rubbed at his eyes tiredly. Yeah. Rain tapped softly against the diner windows while somebody near the counter argued about college football rankings loud enough to threaten public peace. Ordinary life, continuing around extraordinary pain. Funny how often heartbreak happens beside pancakes. Brandon finally looked up at me. I need you to understand something. I stayed quiet. Because sometimes silence is kinder than interruption. I never wanted you dead. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Not because I thought he did, because the fact he needed to clarify it at all meant we had both crossed into emotional territory neither of us ever imagined reaching. I know, I said quietly. His eyes watered slightly. First time. Not full crying, but close. I was scared. There it was again. Fear. The real engine underneath everything. Not greed. Fear wearing greed's clothes. I built this whole life in Charlotte, he continued quietly. The car. The condo. The business image. The clients. He laughed bitterly. Turns out if you spend enough years pretending to be successful, eventually you create bills that require pretending forever. That might have been the most honest sentence he'd spoken in years. I stirred my coffee slowly. You should have told me. I know. I would have helped you. I know. Another silence. Less hostile this time. Just sad. Brandon stared out the diner window. When Mom died, his voice cracked slightly. Everything got louder after that. I looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean pressure, expectations, failure. He swallowed hard. Mom made everything feel stable. After she was gone, I think I panicked. That one hit deep. Because Eleanor had been the emotional center of our family. Warm, steady. The person who noticed fractures before they widened. Without her, all of us drifted slightly off balance. Some worse than others. Brandon looked back at me carefully. I started thinking about the estate because it felt like the only way out. Out of debt. Out of humiliation. Ah, there it was. Not survival, ego, status, fear of looking like a failure. That's the poison modern America feeds people constantly. Your value equals your appearance of success. I hated that poison, but I finally understood how deeply Brandon had swallowed it. Martha arrived with fresh coffee and slid blueberry pancakes onto the table. For emotional support, she announced. Then she pointed at Brandon with the spatula. And if you emotionally damage this man again, I'll beat you with a waffle iron. That startled an actual laugh out of him. Real laugh. First one in months, probably. God, I'd missed hearing that. After Martha walked away, Brandon shook his head slightly. She still terrifies me. She should. Another small smile. Tiny moment, but important. Now listen carefully because this part matters most. Forgiveness isn't a movie scene. Nobody stood dramatically. Nobody hugged while inspirational music played. Real forgiveness starts smaller, much smaller. Sometimes it starts with pancakes and exhausted honesty. Brandon looked down at the table quietly. I'm sorry. Simple words. No excuses attached, no manipulation, no strategic phrasing, just sorry. And somehow that mattered more than all the explanations combined. I nodded slowly. I know. Not, it's okay. Because it wasn't okay. Not yet. Maybe not ever completely. Some betrayals leave permanent scratches even after healing begins. But scratches aren't always fatal. I reached into my jacket pocket and slid a folded document across the table. Brandon frowned slightly. What's this, the revised estate summary? His eyes widened. I told you, I said calmly. Most still goes to the Asheville Community Fund. He nodded immediately. No argument this time. Good sign. But Emily's trust remains. He looked up sharply. You kept that. She's my granddaughter. His eyes filled again. And there's one more condition. What? If you ever try turning family into inventory again, I haunt you personally. That got another laugh, wet-eyed this time, but real. We sat there a while after that. Not fixed, not healed, just honest. And honestly, that was enough for now. Because family reconciliation isn't clean. It's awkward, slow, fragile, like rebuilding a burned porch one wooden plank at a time. When we finally stood to leave, Brandon hesitated outside the diner, then quietly asked, "You think Mom would have forgiven me?" That question nearly destroyed me. I looked toward the mountains beyond Marymount Avenue, where fog still hung low against the Blue Ridge skyline. Then I smiled sadly. "Your mother forgave people before they finished apologizing." He cried then, not loudly, just silently beside an old Honda Accord on a cold Asheville morning. And for the first time in a very long while, he looked less like a man chasing inheritance and more like my son again. Life lesson. Here's what I'll tell you. Money doesn't destroy families by itself. Fear does. Pride does. Silence does. A lot of people watching this probably know exactly what I mean. Maybe you've sat at a dinner table where love slowly became transactional. Maybe you've watched someone you trusted start measuring relationships in percentages and expectations instead of care and honesty. And maybe, just maybe, you've also learned the hardest truth of all. Sometimes the people we love most can still lose themselves chasing appearances. But I need you to understand something important. Boundaries are not cruelty. Protecting yourself is not betrayal. And forgiveness does not require pretending the damage never happened. Real healing starts with truth, even uncomfortable truth, especially uncomfortable truth. If this story meant something to you, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever been in a situation like this? We read every single one, and as always, thank you for being a part of this.